If $1 means nothing, why did you grab it so fast? The question froze the entire diner. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air. Outside, a cold Chicago wind rattled the windows. 8-year-old Hannah Brooks stood beside the counter, her small hand still stretched forward. A single dollar had just disappeared into Richard Calloway's fist. "Mind your business, little girl," he snapped. Nobody spoke. At a corner table, a gray-haired man in an old jacket slowly lifted his eyes from his coffee cup. He studied Hannah's face. She didn't look away. That dollar had been the last money she had. The stranger's voice finally broke the silence. "Why would you give away your last dollar to someone you don't even know?" Hannah opened her mouth to answer, and Richard suddenly looked nervous. "Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment with your country and your local time right now. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world, and if you enjoy stories about kindness, courage, and ordinary people making a difference, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next chapter." Hannah looked at the man for a moment. The diner was quiet except for the soft hiss of the coffee machine and the distant rumble of a city bus outside. She shrugged. "You looked like you needed it." A few customers exchanged glances. The answer was so simple that nobody knew what to say. The man studied her face. "You don't even know me." Hannah nodded. "I know." "Then why help me?" She looked down at the empty spot on the counter where her dollar had been. "My mom says people don't stop needing help just because they're strangers." For the first time, something moved behind the man's eyes. Richard Calloway cleared his throat. "Mister?" He stopped himself. Too late. The man turned slightly toward him. Richard quickly forced a smile. "I'm sorry about this interruption." The smile never reached his eyes. Hannah noticed. Children noticed things adults missed, especially children who spent a lot of time watching people. Maggie Turner stepped from behind the counter carrying a fresh cup of coffee. Steam rose into the chilly morning air. "Why don't we all calm down?" she said. Richard released the dollar onto the counter. The bill landed with a soft flutter. Hannah immediately picked it up. She folded it carefully, very carefully, as if it mattered. Because it did. The man watched her do it. Then he stood. "I think I'll be leaving." Richard hurried after him. "I'll walk you out." The diner door opened. Cold air rushed inside. Then both men disappeared. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Maggie leaned across the counter. "Hannah, honey. Who was that?" The little girl shook her head. "No idea." Maggie laughed softly. "Well, whoever he is, you certainly got his attention." Hannah wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about breakfast, or rather the lack of it. Her stomach growled. Maggie heard it. Without saying anything, she disappeared into the kitchen. A minute later, she returned carrying a paper plate. 2 slices of toast, 1 scrambled egg, a small orange. "I made too much." They both knew that wasn't true. Hannah smiled. "Thank you. Eat while it's warm." The smell made Hannah's mouth water. She hadn't eaten since lunch the previous day. Not because her mother forgot, because there wasn't enough. Angela Brooks worked harder than anyone Hannah knew. She left home before sunrise. Sometimes she came back after dark. Sometimes after midnight. Yet somehow there was never enough money. Not enough for comfort. Not enough for security. Only enough to survive. Most weeks. Some weeks not even that. Hannah ate slowly. She always did. People appreciated things more when they weren't guaranteed. Outside the diner window, snowflakes drifted through the gray Chicago morning. The city looked cold, tired, almost lonely. After breakfast, Hannah thanked Maggie again and started walking home. Her apartment building sat 3 blocks away. The elevator hadn't worked in months. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and radiator heat. She climbed 4 flights of stairs. When she reached the apartment door, something white caught her eye. An envelope, taped to the frame. Her stomach tightened. She knew that envelope. Adults always looked worried when envelopes like that arrived. Hannah carefully pulled it free. Large blue letters covered the top. Westbrook Haven Housing Assistance Program. The logo was impossible to miss. A small blue house, a curved line underneath. She had seen it before, many times, mostly on letters that made her mother sit quietly at the kitchen table afterward. The apartment was silent when she stepped inside. Angela was sleeping. She had worked a 12-hour night shift. Hannah placed the envelope on the table. Then she sat beside it, looking, waiting, listening to the radiator click and hiss. Hours passed. Eventually, Angela woke. Her eyes looked exhausted, the kind of tired sleep couldn't fix. She noticed the envelope immediately. The color drained from her face. Slowly, she opened it. Read it again, then lowered the paper. Her fingers trembled. Hannah didn't ask questions right away. She waited. Finally, she spoke. "Mom." Angela forced a smile. The smile lasted only a second. "It's okay, baby." Whenever adults said that, it usually wasn't. "What happened?" Angela folded the letter. "We just need to update some paperwork." That's all. But Hannah noticed her mother wasn't looking at her. She was staring at the wall. A long silence filled the apartment. Then Angela stood. "I need coffee." She walked into the kitchen. Hannah heard a drawer open, then another, searching for something that wasn't there. Money, probably. The little girl looked down at the envelope again. The Blue House logo stared back at her. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Later that afternoon, Hannah returned to the diner. Maggie was wiping tables. The lunch crowd had thinned. "Everything okay?" Maggie asked. Hannah climbed onto a stool. "My mom got another letter." Maggie's expression changed immediately. "The housing program." Hannah nodded. The older woman sighed. "You know, you're not the first family." "What do you mean?" Maggie hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing, Hannah could tell. Before she could ask more questions, the diner door opened. The same man from that morning walked inside. The old jacket, the calm eyes, the quiet way he moved. He spotted Hannah immediately and smiled, a real smile this time. Not a big one, just enough. He approached her table. "Hello again." "Hi." He sat across from her. Maggie looked curious, but said nothing. The man glanced at the envelope peeking from Hannah's backpack. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. The blue logo was visible. Westbrook Haven. The same logo Hannah had seen on her mother's letter. The same logo printed on several folders Richard had carried earlier that morning. For a brief second, the man's expression changed, as though 2 separate pieces of a puzzle had suddenly touched. He pointed gently. "That logo seems important around here." Hannah followed his gaze, then nodded. "My mom says they help people." The man looked thoughtful. "Do they?" Hannah opened her mouth, then stopped. Outside, a police siren echoed somewhere in the distance. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee filled the room. The little girl reached into her backpack, pulled out the envelope, and stared at the logo again. Suddenly, she remembered something. The folder Richard had dropped earlier, just for a second, before picking it up. The exact same blue house, the exact same symbol. Her eyes widened. Slowly, she looked up at the stranger, then toward the diner window across the street. Richard Calloway was standing beside a black SUV, talking on his phone, holding a folder with the same logo. And for the first time, Hannah realized the man who took her dollar that morning might somehow be connected to the letter threatening her family's home. Richard Calloway stood across the street speaking into his phone. Snow drifted around him. Cars rolled past. People hurried along the sidewalk. Yet Hannah couldn't stop staring at the blue logo on the folder tucked beneath his arm. The same blue house, the same curved line, the same symbol printed on the letter sitting on her kitchen table. She looked back at the stranger across from her. He had noticed Richard, too. His eyes followed the man for a moment before returning to Hannah. "You know him?" Hannah asked. The stranger folded his hands. "A little." That wasn't really an answer. Hannah knew it, so did he. Maggie placed a fresh cup of coffee on the table. The rich smell drifted through the diner. Outside, another gust of wind rattled the glass. The stranger nodded toward Hannah's backpack. "That letter seems important." Hannah pulled it halfway out. "My mom says it's paperwork." The man waited. Children often kept talking when adults gave them space. "My mom always says paperwork is important." He smiled faintly. "Most adults do." Hannah looked down at the envelope. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes people hide lies inside important papers." The stranger's eyebrows lifted slightly. The words sounded too old for an 8-year-old. But Hannah wasn't trying to sound wise. She was simply saying what she had observed. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Richard climbed into the black SUV and drove away. The stranger watched until the vehicle disappeared. His expression became thoughtful. Very thoughtful. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hannah?" "I'm Benjamin." She nodded. Neither of them mentioned last names. A strange friendship was beginning to form. The kind that arrives quietly, without warning, without explanation. Benjamin glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting." Hannah smiled. "Important paperwork." For the first time all day, Benjamin laughed, a genuine laugh. It surprised even him. "Something like that." He stood, then paused. "Hannah." "Yeah, thank you for this morning." She shrugged. "No problem." Benjamin walked toward the door, then stopped, turned around. "Take care of your mother." The words lingered in the air long after he left. An hour later, Benjamin Sullivan sat in the back seat of a black sedan. The vehicle moved through Chicago traffic. Tall buildings reflected pale winter sunlight. His assistant sat beside him reviewing notes. "Westbrook Haven is our highest-rated community housing project," she said. Benjamin remained silent. "The reports are excellent." Still silence. "Resident satisfaction scores are strong." Benjamin finally spoke. "Who created the reports?" His assistant looked down. "Richard Calloway's office." Benjamin stared out the window. The city passed in shades of gray and white. For years he had trusted systems, reports, charts, numbers, audits, data. Data never cried. Data never lied awake worrying about eviction. Data never skipped meals. People did. And somehow he had begun thinking the two were the same. The sedan turned into the entrance of Westbrook Haven. Several apartment buildings rose ahead. Fresh paint. New signs. Neat landscaping. Everything looked perfect, maybe too perfect. Richard stood waiting near the entrance, smiling, always smiling. "Mr. Sullivan." Benjamin stepped out. The cold air bit through his coat. Richard immediately began his presentation. "We've transformed this community." He pointed toward a playground. Children laughed on swings. Parents chatted nearby. Everything looked exactly like a brochure. Benjamin walked slowly, listening, watching, thinking. Something felt rehearsed, like a stage play. Everywhere Richard pointed there was another success story, another achievement, another statistic. Yet Benjamin noticed small things. A broken window on the 4th floor. A maintenance request taped inside a hallway. A flickering light near a stairwell. Tiny details, easy to ignore, unless you were looking. And Benjamin was looking, more carefully than Richard realized. Across town, Hannah sat at the kitchen table doing homework. Angela slept on the couch. Exhaustion hung over the apartment like a heavy blanket. The radiator clicked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window. Hannah tried focusing on math. Instead, she kept looking at the letter. Something bothered her. A lot. She opened her notebook, started drawing. A house, a curved line, the logo, then another house. Another curved line. The folder Richard carried, exactly the same. The more she thought about it, the less she liked it. Finally, she closed the notebook. Her eyes drifted toward her sleeping mother. Dark circles rested beneath Angela's eyes. Even while asleep, she looked worried. Hannah hated that. Children notice worry, even when adults try hiding it, especially then. The next morning, Benjamin returned to Westbrook Haven. This time without Richard. Without assistance. Without announcements. Just himself. He wanted to see the place when nobody expected him. The lobby smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. A maintenance worker pushed a cart past him. 2 residents waited beside a broken elevator. Benjamin introduced himself. Most didn't recognize him, which was exactly what he wanted. An elderly woman complained about heating problems. A father mentioned delays in receiving rental assistance. A grandmother spoke about unanswered paperwork. Benjamin listened. The stories didn't match Richard's reports, not even close. Hours later, he entered the administrative office. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. Computers hummed quietly, employees typed, answered phones, processed forms, normal office activity. Then Benjamin noticed something. A list sitting on a desk, just for a moment, before someone picked it up. Names. Apartment numbers. Support status. His eyes stopped on one name, Angela Brooks, Apartment 4. B Housing Assistance approved. Benefits distributed complete. Benjamin frowned. Complete. That didn't make sense. Hannah's family had received an eviction notice. Why would approved assistance lead to eviction? He asked for a copy. The employee hesitated, then complied. Benjamin read the entry again. And again. Everything appeared proper, official, documented, verified. But something felt wrong. The same feeling he'd experienced yesterday. The feeling Hannah had somehow triggered with one simple question. That evening, Hannah returned to Turner Family Diner. The dinner crowd was small. The smell of grilled onions filled the room. Maggie polished glasses behind the counter. Benjamin sat alone in a booth, as if he had been expecting her. "Hi," Hannah said. "Hello?" She climbed into the seat across from him. Neither spoke for a moment. Outside, headlights slid across the window. Finally, Benjamin placed a folder on the table. "Hannah, can I ask you something?" She nodded. He opened the folder. Several documents appeared. One page showed Angela Brooks. Another showed housing assistance records. Benjamin tapped the paper gently. "According to this, your mother received every benefit she qualified for." Hannah immediately shook her head. "No." "You're sure?" "Yes." Benjamin studied her carefully. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just certainty. Children usually weren't that confident unless they truly believed something. "My mom would have told me." Benjamin leaned back. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Hannah looked at him, then looked at the papers, then back at him. A long silence followed. Finally, she spoke, very softly. "Grown-ups call it paperwork when they don't want to say somebody lied." Benjamin felt something tighten inside his chest. The diner suddenly seemed quieter, the sounds more distant, the smell of coffee stronger. For a moment he remembered being a little boy, watching his own mother argue with landlords, creditors, officials, people holding clipboards, people holding power, people holding paperwork. The memory vanished almost as quickly as it arrived, but it left something behind. A question. A serious question. What if Hannah was right? And if she was, how many other families were living inside the same lie? Benjamin slowly closed the folder, then looked through the diner window. Across the street, a black SUV had just parked. Richard Calloway stepped out, and in his hand was another stack of blue folders. The same blue house, the same logo, the same symbol. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, he stopped wondering whether there was a problem, and started wondering how big it was. The next 3 days felt different. Not better, just different, like the air before a storm. Benjamin Sullivan stopped appearing as a visitor. Instead, he became a shadow, watching, listening, asking questions nobody expected. And Richard Calloway was beginning to notice. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. A layer of ice covered the sidewalks outside Westbrook Haven. Residents shuffled carefully across the parking lot. Their breath formed white clouds in the freezing air. Inside the administration building, Richard forced his usual smile. But the smile was becoming harder to maintain. Benjamin sat across from him in a conference room. A folder rested on the table between them. The room smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee. Richard slid another report across the table. Everything is operating exactly as intended. Benjamin opened the report. Pages of numbers, charts, approval records, expense summaries. Everything looked flawless, too flawless. Benjamin turned a page, then another. Finally, he spoke. How many eviction notices were issued this quarter? Richard answered immediately. Very few. How many? Richard's smile tightened. I'd have to check the exact number. Benjamin closed the report. Then check. For the first time, silence settled over the room. Richard wasn't used to being questioned this way. Not by donors, not by board members, and certainly not by Benjamin Sullivan. The billionaire's calm voice somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. Richard nodded. I'll have the information sent over. Benjamin simply stared at him. The meeting ended 10 minutes later, but Richard walked away with sweat gathering beneath his collar despite the winter cold. That afternoon, Hannah returned from school. The hallways of Westbrook Haven were unusually quiet. She climbed the stairs slowly. 4th floor. Apartment 4. B. Home. As she approached the door, she noticed Mrs. Jenkins standing outside her own apartment. The elderly woman lived 2 doors down. She usually smiled. Today she didn't. A folded paper trembled in her hands. The same blue logo, the same blue house. Hannah recognized it immediately. You got one too? Hannah asked softly. Mrs. Jenkins looked surprised. Then she nodded. They said there was a problem with my paperwork. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Again, another person, not just her mother. Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice. I've lived here 12 years. The old woman stared at the paper. They never had a problem before. Hannah didn't know what to say. She only knew something felt wrong. Very wrong. The little girl entered her apartment. Angela sat at the kitchen table. Bills covered the surface. The yellow kitchen light cast long shadows across the room. The smell of instant noodles drifted through the apartment. Dinner. Again. Angela rubbed her forehead. A headache, probably another one. Hannah quietly put down her backpack. Mom, Angela looked up. Yeah, baby? Did Mrs. Jenkins get a letter too? The question made Angela freeze, only for a second, but Hannah saw it. "Who told you that?" "I saw her." Angela slowly leaned back. Then she sighed, a long sigh, the kind adults make when they carry too much. "A lot of people got letters." "Why?" "We don't know." That answer bothered Hannah more than anything. Adults usually knew things, or pretended to. Lately, nobody seemed to know anything. Later that evening, Hannah walked to Turner Family Diner. The warm smell of baked bread greeted her immediately. Maggie stood behind the counter. A basketball game played quietly on the television. Only a few customers remained. Hannah climbed onto her usual stool. Maggie handed her a cup of hot chocolate, without asking, without charging. The older woman noticed things too. Hannah wrapped both hands around the warm cup. The heat felt wonderful. Outside, snowflakes drifted beneath streetlights. Inside, everything felt safe, for a little while. "Maggie? Are people getting kicked out?" Maggie stopped wiping the counter. The cloth remained frozen in her hand. For a moment, she seemed unsure how much to say. Finally, she leaned closer. "Why are you asking?" "Because everybody keeps getting letters." Maggie glanced around the diner, making sure nobody was listening. Then she lowered her voice. "I've heard some things." "What things?" "Families losing assistants." "Why?" "I don't know." The answer came too quickly, too carefully. Hannah noticed. Children often recognized hesitation before adults did. Maggie wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling everything either. Before Hannah could ask more questions, the diner door opened. Benjamin walked inside. The cold air followed him. His eyes immediately found Hannah, then Maggie. Something in his expression looked serious, very serious. He ordered coffee, sat in the booth near the window, and waited. A few minutes later, Hannah carried her hot chocolate to his table. "Hi," Benjamin smiled. "Hello, Hannah?" She climbed into the seat across from him. The window beside them rattled softly from the wind. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Benjamin pulled a sheet of paper from his briefcase. A list, names, apartment numbers, status updates. He pointed toward several entries. "Do you know any of these people?" Hannah leaned closer. Mrs. Jenkins, Mr. Rivera, the Williams family. The names felt familiar. She had seen them around the building. "Yes," Benjamin nodded. "They all received assistance?" "No." The answer came immediately. Benjamin looked surprised. Hannah pointed at Mrs. Jenkins' name. "She got a letter." Then another. "And them." Then another. "And them too." Benjamin studied her face. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just conviction. The conviction of someone describing what she had actually seen, not what she thought, what she knew. A troubling feeling settled deeper into Benjamin's chest. The reports said one thing, the residents said another. And now the evidence was beginning to pile up. The next morning, Benjamin visited several apartments. Unannounced, no Richard, no staff, just questions. Simple questions. Did you receive assistance? Did someone help you complete the paperwork? Did the program solve your problem? Again and again, the answers failed to match official records. Some residents had received partial assistance, others had received nothing. Yet the files showed completed support, closed cases, successful outcomes. Someone was lying. The question was who, and Benjamin was beginning to suspect the answer. That afternoon, Richard arrived at Westbrook Haven carrying several folders. He moved quickly through the building. Too quickly. His smile appeared forced. His eyes constantly scanned the hallways. He was nervous. Very nervous. Benjamin noticed. People who had nothing to hide rarely behaved that way. As Richard exited a side office, something slipped from his stack of papers. A single sheet fluttered to the floor. He didn't notice. Benjamin did. So did someone else. Hannah. She had been walking home from school. The paper landed near a trash can. Richard continued down the hallway. Gone. Neither noticed the document. For several seconds, Hannah stared at it. Then she picked it up. The paper smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and printer toner. Numbers covered the page, invoices, payments, company names. Most meant nothing to her. But one detail stood out. A company address. The same address appeared 3 different times. Strange, very strange. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Hannah quickly folded the paper, tucked it inside her backpack, and looked toward the stairwell. Richard had suddenly stopped walking, as though he realized something was missing. Slowly, he turned around. His eyes swept the hallway, searching, looking, hunting. Then they landed directly on Hannah. For a second, neither moved, neither spoke. Richard forced a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Not even a little. "Hannah," he said. The little girl gripped her backpack strap. "Hello." Richard took a slow step forward, then another. His gaze dropped briefly toward her backpack, then returned to her face. And suddenly, Hannah knew. He wasn't looking for a lost piece of paper. He was looking for that specific piece of paper. Richard Calloway smiled. But Hannah had learned something important about adults. Sometimes the most dangerous smiles were the calmest ones. The hallway felt colder suddenly. The old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A pipe rattled somewhere behind the walls. Richard stopped a few feet away. "Heading home from school?" he asked. Hannah nodded. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap. Inside the backpack was the paper he had dropped. She didn't fully understand what it meant, but she understood one thing. He wanted it, very badly. Richard glanced toward the backpack. Only for a moment, then back to her face. "I seem to have misplaced a document." "Oh." His smile widened slightly. "Have you seen any papers lying around?" Hannah looked directly at him. "No." The lie felt strange in her mouth. She almost never lied. But something told her not to hand over the paper, not yet. Richard studied her for several seconds. The silence stretched. Then he laughed softly. "Well, if you happen to find anything important, let me know." "Okay." He took another step closer. "Some documents can be very confusing." Hannah didn't answer, especially for children. Now she understood. It wasn't a warning. Not exactly, but it wasn't kindness either. Finally, Richard stepped aside. "You have a good evening." "You too." Hannah walked away. She didn't run. Running would make it obvious. But she could feel his eyes on her back all the way to the stairwell. The moment she entered her apartment, she pulled the paper from her backpack. Angela was getting ready for work. The smell of inexpensive perfume mixed with laundry detergent filled the small apartment. A winter sunset cast orange light through the window. "What is that?" Angela asked. Hannah spread the paper on the kitchen table. Numbers, amounts, invoices, company names. Angela frowned. "Where did you get this?" "It fell out of Richard's folder." Angela immediately looked concerned. "Hannah." He wanted it back. That got her attention. Angela sat down. She read the page carefully. Then again and again. The more she read, the more worried she looked. "What does it mean?" Hannah asked. Angela shook her head. "I don't know." But Hannah could tell she recognized something. A company name, an address, maybe both. The older woman folded the paper. "Leave this with me." "Should we give it back?" Angela looked toward the window, thinking. Then she said quietly, "Not yet." That night, Angela couldn't sleep, even after returning from work, even after midnight. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She sat alone at the kitchen table. The paper lay beside her coffee mug. The same company appeared repeatedly, Lakeview Administrative Services. The same address appeared on every invoice, and the billing amounts looked unusually high. Angela wasn't an accountant, but she handled enough paperwork at the hospital to know when numbers felt wrong. At 2 in the morning, she finally folded the paper again, then slipped it into a drawer. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something important. The next afternoon, Hannah went to Turner Family Diner. Snow had stopped falling. The streets were wet and shining beneath pale sunlight. The smell of fresh bread welcomed her as she entered. Maggie stood behind the counter. A country song played softly from an old radio. Benjamin occupied his usual booth near the window. When he saw Hannah, he waved her over. "You look serious today." Hannah climbed into the seat. "I found something." Benjamin noticed the change immediately. Children usually arrived with stories, not evidence. "What did you find?" Hannah reached into her backpack, carefully, then handed him the folded paper. Benjamin unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page, once, twice, then a third time. The expression on his face slowly changed, not dramatically, just enough. "What is it?" Hannah asked. Benjamin looked toward the window, thinking, analyzing. The way people did when pieces suddenly started fitting together. Where did this come from? Richard dropped it. Benjamin looked back at the paper. One company name had been highlighted: Lakeview Administrative Services. He knew the name, at least vaguely. The company occasionally appeared in expense reports connected to Westbrook Haven. Nothing unusual, or so he had thought. Now, he wasn't so sure. Did anyone else see this? Hannah shook her head. Richard wanted it back. Benjamin leaned forward. "What exactly did he say?" Hannah repeated the conversation word for word. Benjamin listened carefully, every sentence, every detail. When she finished, he remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he folded the document. This was smart. Hannah blinked. What was keeping it? The little girl looked relieved. She had been wondering whether she had done the wrong thing. Benjamin slipped the paper into a folder. "I'd like to look into this." "Okay." And Hannah, "Yeah. If Richard asks about it again, don't argue with him." She nodded. "I won't." Benjamin smiled. "Good." Across town, Richard sat inside his office. His desk looked perfectly organized. His tie perfectly straight. His smile perfectly practiced. But appearances can be deceptive. His fingers drummed against the desk, again, and again, and again. The missing invoice refused to leave his mind. He had searched everywhere, nothing, no trace. And now, Benjamin Sullivan was asking questions. Too many questions. Questions about evictions. Questions about assistance payments. Questions about records. The timing felt dangerous. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Emily Parker entered carrying several files. She looked nervous, more nervous than usual. Richard noticed immediately. "What is it?" Emily hesitated, then handed him a folder. Mr. Sullivan requested additional accounting records. Richard's jaw tightened. "What records?" Emily listed them. Housing expenditures, food assistance invoices, vendor payments, internal audits, every category Richard least wanted examined. He forced a smile. "I'll review them personally." Emily nodded, but she didn't leave. Richard looked up. "Something else." The young accountant shifted uneasily. "I noticed some duplicate billing entries." Silence. Complete silence. Richard stared at her. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. What kind of duplicate entries? Emily swallowed. Several invoices appear to have been processed twice. For a brief second, panic flashed across Richard's face, then disappeared, almost instantly. You must be mistaken. Maybe. But her voice lacked confidence. Richard stood, walked around the desk, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Emily? Yes. Accounting can be complicated. She nodded, especially when you don't have the full picture. Another nod. Richard smiled. Leave those concerns to me. Emily forced a smile in return, then exited the office. The moment the door closed, Richard's smile vanished. Completely. He walked quickly to the window, looked out at the parking lot below. His jaw clenched. Too many people were asking questions. Benjamin, the residents, now Emily, and somewhere out there. A little girl had found something she wasn't supposed to find. That evening, Angela arrived home later than usual. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. She opened the apartment door, stopped, and froze. A new envelope sat on the kitchen table. The same blue logo, the same blue house. Westbrook Haven. Slowly she opened it, read the first page, then the second. The color drained from her face. Hannah watched from the couch. Mom. Angela lowered the papers. Her hands were shaking. What happened? Hannah whispered. Angela struggled to answer. Finally, she managed 3 words. Final eviction notice. The apartment fell silent. The refrigerator hummed. A siren echoed somewhere outside, and on the kitchen table beside the eviction letter lay the invoice Richard desperately wanted to recover. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Angela sat at the kitchen table. The final eviction notice remained in front of her. The yellow light above the stove cast shadows across the paper. Hannah watched from the couch. Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside, freezing rain tapped softly against the window. Finally, Hannah climbed down from the couch. She walked to the table. Are we going to lose our home? Angela looked away. The question hurt because it deserved an honest answer, and honest answers were becoming harder to find. I don't know, baby. Hannah stared at the eviction notice, then at the invoice they had found, then back at her mother. Somehow, the 2 papers felt connected. One represented a problem. The other felt like a clue. The little girl couldn't explain why. She simply felt it. The following afternoon, Hannah left school and headed directly toward the Westbrook Haven administrative office. She hadn't told her mother. Not because she wanted to disobey, because she wanted answers. Cold wind swept through the parking lot. The sky hung low and gray above the city. The office building stood near the center of the complex. Large glass doors, fresh paint. A sign proudly displaying the Blue House logo. Everything looked professional, trustworthy, important. Hannah pushed open the door. Warm air greeted her. The lobby smelled faintly of copier toner and lemon cleaner. A receptionist glanced up from her computer. Can I help you? Hannah approached the desk. I need to talk to somebody. The woman smiled politely. Where are your parents? At work. The smile disappeared. Then you'll need to come back with an adult. It's important. The receptionist returned her attention to the computer. I'm sorry. Conversation over, at least for the receptionist, not for Hannah. She remained standing there, looking around, watching, listening. Adults often forgot children were paying attention. That was usually when they learned the most. Several employees moved through the hallways carrying folders. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Voices drifted from nearby offices. Everything looked normal. Almost. Then Hannah spotted a familiar figure. Richard Calloway. He emerged from a side hallway carrying a stack of folders. The moment he saw Hannah, he stopped. His expression changed instantly. Not surprise, concern, real concern. That alone told Hannah she was in the right place. Richard quickly forced a smile. "Hannah." "Hi." The receptionist looked confused. "You know her." Richard laughed lightly. "Of course." He walked over. The smell of expensive cologne followed him. "What brings you here today?" Hannah looked directly at him. "My mom got a final eviction notice." For a brief moment his smile flickered, only slightly, but Hannah saw it. "These things happen sometimes. My mom says she didn't get the help she was supposed to." Richard nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure there's an explanation." The words sounded rehearsed, like he had said them many times before. Hannah didn't move, neither did Richard. The lobby suddenly felt very quiet. Then she asked a question, a simple question, one that caught him off guard. "Why were you looking for that paper so hard?" Silence. The receptionist stopped typing. A nearby employee looked up. Richard's smile remained frozen. "What paper? The one you dropped?" Still silence. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his eyes, only for a second, but it was enough. Richard recovered quickly. "I dropped lots of papers." "No." Hannah shook her head. "You wanted that one." The receptionist glanced between them. Confused, curious, watching. Richard's jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly, then he laughed, again, a little too loudly. Hannah, paperwork can be complicated. There was that word again, paperwork, always paperwork, the answer adults used when they didn't want to answer. At that exact moment, another voice entered the conversation. "She's right." Everyone turned. Benjamin Sullivan stood near the entrance. No announcement, no assistance, no security, just Benjamin. Richard's face lost color. Only for a second. But this time Hannah wasn't the only one who noticed. The receptionist noticed too. Benjamin walked across the lobby, calm, controlled. His shoes clicked softly against the tile floor. The billionaire stopped beside Hannah, then looked directly at Richard. "I've been reviewing several invoices." Richard forced another smile. "Excellent. Interesting reading." The smile weakened. Benjamin continued. "I noticed repeated payments to Lakeview Administrative Services." Now the color disappeared completely. Richard recovered quickly. "It's a vendor." "I know." Benjamin nodded. "I checked." The silence returned. Heavier this time. The receptionist suddenly seemed fascinated by her keyboard. Employees found reasons to stay nearby. Nobody wanted to leave, because everyone sensed something important was happening. Benjamin pulled a document from a folder. The same invoice Hannah had found. Richard recognized it immediately. His eyes locked onto the paper, just for a second. But that second mattered. Benjamin saw it. So did Hannah. And something else happened. Something Richard didn't realize. He made a mistake. A small one, but a devastating one. "That invoice was already processed," Richard said. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "Was it?" "Yes." "You seem very certain." Richard nodded immediately. "Of course." Benjamin tilted his head slightly. "And how do you know it's that invoice?" Silence. Absolute silence. The lobby felt frozen. Even the phone seemed quieter. Richard blinked, once, twice. Then realization struck. He had answered too quickly. Hannah had never mentioned which invoice. Benjamin had never identified the document. Yet Richard somehow knew exactly which paper they were discussing, because he already knew what was on it, because he had been looking for it, because it mattered. The receptionist slowly looked up. A maintenance worker stopped walking. Two employees exchanged glances. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Richard had accidentally revealed more than he intended. The irony would have been funny if the situation weren't so serious. Trying to protect himself, he had exposed himself. Benjamin calmly slid the invoice back into the folder. No accusations, no dramatic speeches, just observation. The most dangerous kind. Richard attempted to recover. "You're misunderstanding." "Maybe." Benjamin's voice remained calm. "That's why I'm requesting a full independent audit." The word audit landed like a hammer. Richard felt it. Everyone did. Audit, effective immediately. The muscles in Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't think that's necessary." Benjamin looked at him steadily. "I do." For several seconds, neither man spoke. The tension filled the room. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. Then Benjamin turned toward Hannah. "Thank you for bringing attention to this." The little girl nodded. She wasn't entirely sure what had happened, but she knew one thing. Richard looked scared. And that was new. Very new. Late that evening, another person sat alone in the accounting department. Emily Parker. The young accountant stared at her computer screen. Rows of numbers filled the monitor. Invoices, payments, transfers, records. The same records she'd reviewed dozens of times. Yet now they looked different. Because she was finally looking closely. Really closely. Outside her office window, darkness had settled over Chicago. The building was nearly empty. Only the hum of fluorescent lights remained. Emily clicked through another file. Then another. Then another. Her stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. The numbers didn't match. The invoices didn't match. And the deeper she dug, the worse it became. Finally, she opened a blank email. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For nearly a minute she hesitated. Then she began typing. Recipient Benjamin Sullivan. Subject, "You need to see these meal program invoices." Emily attached 6 files, then 7, then 12. The cursor hovered over send. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. One click could cost her career. One click could expose everything. Slowly, she took a breath and pressed the button. Benjamin Sullivan opened the email at 5:17 the next morning. The city outside his hotel window was still dark. Snow covered the rooftops. Streetlights cast pale yellow reflections across icy roads. A cup of untouched coffee sat beside his laptop. Steam drifted slowly upward. Benjamin clicked the first attachment, then the second, then the third. His expression hardened with every file. Meal program invoices, vendor contracts, payment authorizations, amounts that didn't make sense. The same meals appeared multiple times. The same services were billed repeatedly. Thousands of dollars. Then tens of thousands. Then more. A program designed to feed struggling families had somehow become a source of profit. Benjamin leaned back in his chair. The room suddenly felt colder. Not because of the weather, because he realized Hannah's family might be only a tiny piece of a much larger problem. Across town, Hannah sat in her classroom. The heater rattled beneath the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Mrs. Campbell wrote fractions on the whiteboard. Most students copied notes. Hannah tried, but her mind wasn't there. It was at home, on the kitchen table, on the eviction notice. Every time she thought about it, her stomach twisted. The family had less than 3 weeks before they were supposed to leave. 3 weeks. That wasn't very long. Not when you were 8. Not when you didn't know where you would go afterward. The boy sitting behind her leaned forward. "Did your mom really get kicked out?" Several nearby students looked over. Hannah stared at her notebook. The paper blurred slightly. "My mom didn't do anything wrong." The boy shrugged. "My dad said people get kicked out when they don't pay." A few students giggled. Not because they were cruel, because children often repeated what they heard without understanding the weight of it. Hannah looked down at her hands, small hands, cold hands, hands that couldn't fix any of this. The bell finally rang. She gathered her books quietly. As she walked toward the door, another student called out, "My mom says you're probably moving." More laughter. Not loud, not vicious, still painful. Hannah kept walking. Head high, shoulders straight, she didn't answer. Sometimes silence protected dignity better than words. That evening, Angela returned home carrying another envelope. Not from Westbrook Haven, from the hospital. The moment she opened it, her face tightened. Hannah noticed immediately. "What is it?" Angela forced a smile. "Nothing." It wasn't nothing, Hannah knew. The smile was too quick, too fragile. After dinner, Angela stepped into the bedroom to make a phone call. The apartment walls were thin. Hannah couldn't hear every word, only pieces. Trying, "Need more time." My daughter. Please." The conversation ended. The bedroom door remained closed. Several minutes passed, then 10, then 15. When Angela finally emerged, her eyes looked red. She headed straight for the kitchen sink, pretending to wash dishes that were already clean. Hannah pretended not to notice. Both of them were protecting each other. Both knew it. Neither said it. The next morning, Benjamin met Emily Parker in a small coffee shop, a place far away from Westbrook Haven, far away from Richard. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the room. Rainwater streaked the windows. Emily looked exhausted. She hadn't slept much, Benjamin could tell. "Thank you for meeting me." Emily nodded nervously. Her fingers wrapped tightly around a paper cup. "I almost didn't come." "What changed your mind?" She stared into her coffee. For several moments she didn't answer. Then she spoke quietly. "A little girl." Benjamin blinked. "What?" Emily looked up. "I saw Hannah in the office." Benjamin listened. "Richard was talking to her." She swallowed. "He looked afraid." Benjamin said nothing. Emily continued, "I kept thinking, if an 8-year-old can keep asking questions, why can't I?" The words hung between them. Heavy, honest, real. Then Emily opened a folder. More documents, more records, more evidence. "This isn't just housing assistance." Benjamin's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The meal program, too." Emily slid several pages across the table. Benjamin examined them carefully. Duplicate invoices, fake vendor payments, inflated food costs. The pattern was obvious now. Someone had built an entire system around stealing small amounts repeatedly. Amounts small enough to avoid attention, until they became enormous. "Can you prove it?" Benjamin asked. Emily hesitated, then nodded, yes. The answer came with fear and courage, both at once. Meanwhile, Richard Calloway was unraveling. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. He sat alone inside his office. The blinds were closed. The room smelled stale. His phone vibrated constantly. Emails, requests, audit notices, meeting invitations, questions. Too many questions. Richard deleted several messages without reading them. His jaw tightened. He needed control. Control was how he survived. Control was how he succeeded. And lately, control was slipping away. One little girl. One missing invoice, one accountant with a conscience, one billionaire who refused to stop looking. The combination terrified him. That afternoon, Hannah stopped at Turner Family Diner. The warm smell of soup greeted her. Maggie waved from behind the counter. Several regular customers sat quietly eating lunch. A football game played silently on television. Everything seemed normal, until Benjamin arrived. The moment he entered, Hannah noticed something different. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying a heavy realization. He slid into the booth across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Benjamin said quietly, "You were right." Hannah tilted her head. "About what?" "There are problems in the program." The little girl wasn't surprised. Not really, she simply nodded. Benjamin almost smiled. Adults expected children to celebrate being proven right. Hannah didn't. Because being right wasn't the goal. Helping her mother was. Helping everyone else was. The distinction mattered. Very few adults understood that. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Benjamin looked out the window. Snow began falling again. Soft flakes drifting through the gray afternoon. "I don't know yet." The honesty surprised her. Most adults pretended certainty. Benjamin didn't. That made her trust him more. The diner grew quiet. Only the sound of silverware and distant conversation remained. Then Hannah said something that made Benjamin pause. "Truth doesn't get bigger when adults say it." Benjamin looked at her. She continued, "It's still truth when a kid says it." The booth fell silent. Even Maggie seemed to stop moving for a second. Benjamin stared at the little girl. Not because the words were complicated, because they were simple. And true. The best truths often were. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, Benjamin felt something shift. The investigation was no longer about numbers, or reports, or audits. It was about people. Real people. People who had been ignored. People like Hannah. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A notification appeared on the screen. New security footage received. Source: Turner Family Diner. Benjamin frowned. He hadn't requested footage. Slowly, he opened the file. The video loaded, a timestamp appeared. Then an image. The back alley behind the diner. A delivery truck, a shadowy figure. And, standing beside the truck, Richard Calloway. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. The footage had just begun. Benjamin stared at the phone screen. The diner around him faded into the background. The laughter, the dishes, the quiet conversations. All of it disappeared. Only the video remained. The footage came from a security camera mounted above the back door of Turner Family Diner. Black and white, grainy, but clear enough. The timestamp showed 3 weeks earlier, late at night, long after closing. A delivery truck pulled into the alley. Its headlights cut through the darkness. A man stepped out carrying a thick envelope. A second figure approached, Richard Calloway. Benjamin watched silently. Richard accepted the envelope, looked inside, then slipped it beneath his coat. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. No words, no signatures, no paperwork. Nothing that looked official, yet everything about it felt wrong. Very wrong. Benjamin replayed the footage. Again and again. Across the table, Hannah watched him. "What is it?" Benjamin locked the phone. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he looked at her. "It's something important." The little girl nodded. She didn't push. She had learned that sometimes adults needed time to process the truth, even when children saw it first. Later that evening, Benjamin sat inside a conference room at a downtown law office. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Several attorneys reviewed documents spread across a large table. Emily Parker sat nearby, nervous, exhausted, but determined. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Benjamin connected his phone to a screen. The security footage appeared. Nobody spoke while it played. When it ended, silence filled the room. One attorney finally leaned forward. "Do we know what's inside the envelope?" "No." Benjamin folded his arms. "But we know it wasn't reported." Another attorney nodded. "Combined with the invoices and accounting records." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. The evidence was growing. And growing quickly. Still, Benjamin remained cautious. Accusations were easy, proof mattered, especially if they wanted real accountability, not headlines, not rumors. Justice, real justice, that required patience. Across town, Richard Calloway sat alone in his office. The building had emptied hours ago. Only a few lights remained on. The darkness outside pressed against the windows. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He ignored it. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, he answered. "What?" a voice replied. "We need to talk." Richard's stomach tightened. The voice belonged to the owner of Lakeview Administrative Services, one of the companies appearing throughout the invoices, one of the companies Benjamin was investigating. Richard lowered his voice. "This isn't a good time." "No," the man replied. "It really isn't." The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone. His reflection looked back from the dark window. Older than before, more tired. For the first time in years, he felt trapped. The following morning, Hannah woke before sunrise. The apartment was cold. The radiator clicked weakly. Outside, snow covered the fire escapes. Angela sat at the kitchen table. A cup of coffee rested untouched beside her. She looked exhausted, more exhausted than usual. Hannah climbed into the chair across from her. Neither spoke for a moment. The smell of coffee drifted through the room. Finally, Hannah reached across the table, placed her hand over her mother's. Angela squeezed it gently. A small gesture, a powerful one. "We'll be okay," Hannah said. Angela smiled sadly. "You sound very sure." Hannah shrugged. "Because we haven't done anything wrong." The words lingered. Simple, direct, true. Angela looked away. For a second, her eyes glistened. She blinked quickly, trying to hide it. Hannah pretended not to notice. Again, both protecting each other. Later that afternoon, Maggie Turner discovered something unexpected. She was reviewing old receipts in the diner office, a task she hated. Paperwork, always paperwork. The office smelled of cardboard boxes and old files. A small desk lamp illuminated stacks of records. As she sorted through receipts, something caught her attention. A maintenance invoice. Then another. Then a third. Each connected to the same company. Lakeview Administrative Services. Maggie frowned. Why would the same company appear here? The diner had never hired them, at least not directly. She examined the documents more closely. Then her eyes widened. The company had rented storage space behind the diner several times. Temporary deliveries, nighttime pickups, small transactions she had barely noticed. At the time, nothing seemed unusual. Now it did. Very unusual. Maggie immediately called Benjamin. By evening, Benjamin possessed more evidence than ever. Invoices, accounting records, witness statements, security footage, vendor connections. The picture was becoming clearer, but one final piece remained missing: public exposure. Without that, Richard could still manipulate the narrative, still deny, still delay. Benjamin decided it was time. A public meeting, open to residents, open to board members, open to anyone willing to attend. Transparency. The one thing corruption feared most, not punishment. Exposure. News of the meeting spread quickly through Westbrook Haven. People talked in hallways, laundry rooms, parking lots, elevators. Rumors moved faster than snowstorms. Some residents felt hopeful. Others felt afraid. Many expected nothing to change. Years of disappointment had taught them caution. That night, Richard learned about the meeting. The notification appeared in his inbox. Community review session. Attendance required. His jaw tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. He immediately called several board members. No answer. Then several contractors. No answer. Then a lawyer. Voicemail. For the first time, the network he depended upon seemed distant, unreachable, unreliable. Fear settled deeper into his chest. The day before the meeting, Richard drove to Turner Family Diner. Snow crunched beneath his shoes as he crossed the parking lot. The diner windows glowed warmly against the winter darkness. Inside, customers filled several booths. The smell of soup and fresh bread drifted through the room. Maggie looked up the moment he entered. She immediately sensed trouble. Richard approached the counter. His smile returned. That same practice smile. The one nobody trusted anymore. "We need to talk." Maggie crossed her arms. "About what?" "The security footage." The words landed heavily. Nearby customers stopped talking. Not obviously, just enough. Listening without appearing to listen. Witnesses. Silent witnesses. Richard lowered his voice. "You don't want to get involved in this." Maggie's expression hardened. "I already am. You could lose your business." The threat hung in the air, soft, polite, clear. Several customers exchanged glances. Nobody interrupted, nobody spoke, but everyone heard. Richard leaned closer. "Delete the footage." Maggie stared at him for several seconds. Then she shook her head. "No." The answer was simple, firm, final. Richard's smile disappeared. At that exact moment, the diner door opened. Cold air swept through the room. Benjamin Sullivan entered. Snowflakes clung to his coat. His eyes moved from Richard to Maggie, then to the customers silently watching. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Benjamin understood immediately. Richard straightened, trying to recover control, trying to regain authority, trying to reclaim the room. Benjamin calmly removed a folder from beneath his arm. "Tomorrow," he said. Richard said nothing. "The community meeting begins at 6. Still silence, Benjamin looked directly at him. "Bring every explanation you have." The diner fell completely quiet. Outside, snow drifted beneath the streetlights. Inside, Richard felt dozens of eyes watching him. For the first time, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. And he knew it. The next evening would decide everything. Yet, as Richard turned toward the exit, he still believed he could survive. He still believed the evidence wasn't enough. He still believed nobody could truly prove what he had done. The following night, inside a crowded community hall, he would stand before everyone and confidently declare, "There is no evidence." And the moment those words left his mouth, the screen behind him would come alive. The community hall was already full 30 minutes before the meeting began. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the room. People lined the walls. Others stood near the doors. The smell of wet coats, coffee, and melting snow filled the air. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows. Inside, tension hung over everything. Hannah sat beside Angela in the third row. Her feet barely touched the floor. She held her mother's hand tightly, not because she was afraid, because she knew her mother was. Angela tried to hide it, but Hannah could feel it in the way her fingers trembled. At the front of the room stood a large projection screen. Board members occupied a long table nearby. Benjamin Sullivan sat quietly at one end. Several attorneys sat behind him. Emily Parker occupied a chair near the side wall. Her posture was stiff, her hands clasped tightly together. Every few seconds she took a deep breath, preparing herself. Across the room, Richard Calloway entered. His suit looked perfect, his tie perfectly straight. His expression calm, confident, controlled, at least on the surface. He greeted board members, shook hands, smiled. Anyone who didn't know the situation might have believed he was the victim. That was one of Richard's greatest talents, looking trustworthy, even when he wasn't. The meeting began at exactly 6 o'clock. A board member welcomed everyone, then introduced Benjamin. The billionaire stood. The room immediately quieted. No dramatic music, no grand speech, just silence. Benjamin stepped forward. We are here because concerns have been raised regarding Housing Assistance Meal Program funding and financial oversight within Westbrook Haven. His voice remained calm, measured, professional. We will review the facts, nothing more, nothing less. Several residents nodded. That was all they wanted. Facts, truth, answers. Richard stood next. The confidence returned immediately. He smiled at the crowd. I've spent years serving this community. Several people exchanged glances. No one interrupted. Richard continued. I understand concerns have been raised. He spread his hands, but misunderstandings happen. His voice grew stronger, more polished, more practiced. There is no evidence of wrongdoing. The words echoed through the room. For a brief second, complete silence followed. Then Benjamin nodded toward the technician. The screen behind Richard flickered. Richard turned. His smile vanished. The security footage from Turner Family Diner filled the screen. The room became still. The video played. The truck, the envelope, the exchange. Every movement clearly visible. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The footage ended. A murmur spread through the crowd. Richard recovered quickly. That proves nothing. Benjamin remained calm. It raises questions. It proves nothing. Benjamin nodded. Then let's continue. The next slide appeared. Invoices, payment records, vendor contracts, highlighted entries, repeated billing amounts, matching dates, matching signatures, more murmurs. A resident near the back shook his head slowly. Another folded his arms. People were beginning to connect the dots. Then Emily Parker stood. Her legs looked unsteady. For a moment, Hannah worried she might sit back down. Instead, Emily walked to the microphone. The room fell silent again. My name is Emily Parker. Her voice shook slightly. I work in accounting. She paused, took a breath, then continued. I reviewed hundreds of transactions. The screen changed again. New documents appeared, expense reports, approval forms, vendor payments. Emily pointed to several entries. The same invoices were submitted multiple times. She pointed again. These services were never provided. Another page. The meal program was billed for food that was never purchased. The room grew louder. Whispers, gasps, confused conversations. The board chairperson called for order. Eventually, the room settled. Emily continued. I reported concerns internally. She looked toward Richard. He instructed me not to investigate further. Richard immediately stood. That's false. Emily flinched, but remained standing. Benjamin watched quietly. So did Hannah. The young accountant swallowed hard, then said something unexpected. That's why I kept copies. The screen changed again. Emails appeared, dozens of them, dates, times, instructions, responses. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Richard's face darkened. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely worried. His jaw tightened. His breathing changed. Still, he continued fighting. The accounting department misunderstood procedures. Nobody responded. The vendors were legitimate. Again, silence. Richard became louder, more defensive, more desperate. Then he made a mistake. A very big mistake, the kind people make when panic begins replacing caution. He pointed toward one specific invoice displayed on the screen. That payment was approved because the food shipment arrived 2 days late. The moment the words left his mouth, Benjamin looked up. Emily looked up. Several attorneys looked up. Even Hannah sensed something important had happened. Benjamin spoke softly. Interesting. Richard froze. The room became silent. Very silent. Benjamin continued. How do you know which shipment we're discussing? Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. Benjamin pointed at the screen. The invoice number isn't visible. Silence. The room seemed to stop breathing. Richard stared at the screen. Realization hit him, too late. He had identified a specific transaction before anyone else did. A transaction linked directly to fraudulent records. A transaction only someone involved would immediately recognize. The irony was brutal. Trying to defend himself, he had exposed himself again. Several residents began speaking at once. Voices filled the room. Questions, accusations, stories. Years of frustration finally finding an outlet. The board struggled to restore order. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman stood. Mrs. Jenkins, the same woman who lived down the hall from Hannah. She approached the microphone, slowly, carefully. The room quieted. She held up her eviction notice. "I was told my assistance was complete," her voice cracked. "But I never received it." Another resident stood, then another, each carrying documents, letters, notices, records, different families. Same story, again and again. The evidence no longer belonged to accountants or lawyers or billionaires. Now, it belonged to the community. Hannah looked around the room. Faces everywhere. Tired faces, hopeful faces, angry faces. People who had spent years believing nobody listened. Tonight, someone finally was. Beside her, Angela squeezed her hand, hard. Hannah looked up. Her mother wasn't crying, not exactly, but her eyes shimmered beneath the fluorescent lights. For the first time in weeks, some of the fear seemed gone. Not all of it, just enough. Benjamin stood once more. The room gradually quieted. His voice remained steady. "Effective immediately, Richard Calloway is suspended from all duties pending independent investigation." Gasps filled the room. Richard stood abruptly. "You can't do that." Benjamin met his gaze. "The board already has." The board chairperson nodded. Several members raised their hands in agreement. The vote was unanimous. Richard looked around the room. Searching, looking for allies, support, rescue. He found none, not one. The people who once protected him suddenly seemed very far away. Benjamin wasn't finished. "We are also requesting a full forensic audit." Another wave of reactions spread through the audience. Additionally, all eviction actions connected to disputed assistance records will be temporarily suspended pending review. For a second, nobody reacted, as if the words needed time to sink in. Then applause began. Small at first, then louder, then everywhere. Hannah looked at Angela. Angela looked back. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The possibility of losing their home hadn't disappeared. But for the first time, someone had pressed pause. For the first time, they had a chance. As the applause continued, Benjamin glanced toward Hannah. The little girl sat quietly. No celebration, no cheering, just relief. And that told him something important. She had never been fighting for victory. She had been fighting for truth. The meeting ended nearly 2 hours later. People slowly filed toward the exits. Snow continued falling outside. Yet one final surprise remained. As Benjamin gathered his documents, an elderly resident approached the microphone. The room quieted once more. The man lifted a folder, then looked directly at Benjamin. "There are more families." He opened the folder. Inside were dozens of names. Dozens. And every one of them had a story similar to Hannah's. The investigation was far bigger than anyone had imagined. The folder contained 37 names. 37. The number settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The elderly resident handed the folder to Benjamin. "I've been collecting these for years," he said quietly. His name was Walter Green. Most people in Westbrook Haven knew him. A retired city bus driver, a man who rarely complained, a man who paid attention. Benjamin opened the folder. Inside were copies of notices, appeals, rejected applications, letters from residents, handwritten notes. Some pages were old, some recent. Together they told a story, a painful one, a story nobody had wanted to hear until now. The community meeting ended shortly afterward. But the real work was only beginning. 3 days later, the first major announcement arrived. Every disputed eviction notice connected to the investigation was officially suspended. The notice appeared on bulletin boards, community websites, email lists, apartment lobbies. Residents gathered around the postings, reading, rereading, making sure it was real. Many didn't believe it at first. Years of disappointment had taught them caution. Hope could be dangerous, especially when you were used to losing. Angela read the notice twice before showing it to Hannah. The two stood in the apartment kitchen. Morning sunlight filtered through the window. Dust floated through the beams of light. Angela lowered the paper. A long breath escaped her. Not relief, not completely, but close. Very close. Hannah smiled. The first genuine smile in weeks. We're staying. Angela knelt beside her. For now. Hannah wrapped her arms around her mother. The embrace lasted only a few seconds, but it said everything. The investigation expanded quickly. Independent auditors arrived. Attorneys reviewed records. Financial specialists examined years of transactions. More evidence surfaced every day. The numbers were staggering. Funds intended for housing support. Funds intended for food assistance. Funds intended for emergency aid. Large portions had been redirected through fraudulent vendors. Not millions, not enough for headlines, but enough to hurt hundreds of families, enough to change lives, enough to matter. And that made it worse somehow. The theft wasn't spectacular. It was ordinary, systematic, quiet. The kind of wrongdoing that survives because nobody looks closely, until someone does. Richard Calloway no longer occupied the corner office. His name had been removed from the door, his access revoked, his authority gone. The change felt surreal. Several employees walked past the empty office every day. Most said nothing. But they looked. Everyone looked. Power had vanished almost overnight. Not because someone stronger defeated him, because the truth finally reached daylight. Emily Parker became one of the investigation's most important witnesses. The transformation surprised even her. A month earlier, she could barely challenge her supervisor. Now, she sat across from auditors for hours at a time, providing documents, explaining procedures, answering questions. Each interview exhausted her. Yet, after every meeting, she felt lighter, a little less afraid, a little more certain she had done the right thing. Meanwhile, Benjamin Sullivan spent more time in Westbrook Haven than anyone expected. Not because he needed publicity. There were no cameras, no speeches, no press conferences, just work, real work. He attended resident meetings, reviewed audit findings, met with legal advisors, listened. Really listened. The process changed him. He began noticing things he once ignored. The broken elevator, the empty pantry shelves, the aging boilers, the parents working 2 jobs, the children pretending not to worry. The reports never showed those things. The spreadsheets never mentioned them. Yet they mattered. Perhaps more than anything else. One Saturday afternoon, a community gathering was held inside the recreation center. Families filled the room. Children ran between folding tables. The smell of pizza and hot chocolate filled the air. For the first time in months, the atmosphere felt hopeful. Not perfect, hopeful. Benjamin attended quietly. He expected to observe. Instead, he became the center of attention, Residents approached him, thanked him, asked questions, shared concerns, shared stories, many stories, more than he could remember. One conversation stayed with him. A young mother described skipping meals so her children could eat. A grandfather described choosing between medication and heating bills. Neither asked for sympathy, only fairness. Benjamin listened carefully. Every word mattered. Later that afternoon, organizers invited Hannah to say a few words. She immediately shook her head. "No," Maggie laughed. "Come on, sweetheart." Hannah looked horrified. The room chuckled gently. Public speaking was not her favorite thing, not even close. Eventually, she agreed. Mostly because Angela smiled at her. Hannah walked to the microphone. The recreation center suddenly felt enormous. Hundreds of eyes looked her way. She swallowed, adjusted the microphone, then looked around. The room became silent. Everyone expected something profound, something dramatic. Instead, Hannah simply said, "People shouldn't have to be loud just to be believed." Silence followed. Complete silence. Then applause. Not because the sentence was complicated, because it was true. Many people in that room had spent years trying to be heard, trying to explain, trying to prove themselves, trying to convince others their struggles were real. Hannah had somehow captured all of it in one sentence. Benjamin found himself clapping harder than anyone. Several weeks later, major reforms were announced. A new oversight committee would monitor housing assistance. Community representatives would participate directly. Financial reviews would occur regularly. Independent audits would continue. Transparency would become standard procedure. Not because systems were perfect, because they weren't. And pretending otherwise had caused enough damage already. Maggie Turner accepted a position on the Oversight Committee. She resisted at first, then agreed. Someone needed to represent ordinary residents, someone practical, someone honest. Everyone knew she was the right choice. One cold afternoon, Benjamin visited the Brooks apartment. The elevator still didn't work. He climbed 4 flights of stairs. By the time he reached apartment 4B, he was slightly out of breath. Hannah opened the door. "You look tired," Benjamin laughed. "Thanks." Angela invited him inside. The apartment smelled of soup. A small heater hummed in the corner. The place remained modest, simple, yet somehow warmer than many mansions Benjamin had visited. They spoke for nearly an hour, about the investigation, about the reforms, about the future. Eventually, Benjamin reached into his briefcase, removed a large envelope, then placed it on the table. Hannah immediately became suspicious. Very suspicious. She folded her arms. "What is that?" Benjamin smiled. "Open it." Hannah didn't move. "What is it first?" "A letter." "What kind of letter?" Benjamin hesitated. The little girl narrowed her eyes. Angela almost laughed. Finally, Hannah asked the question that had been bothering her. The question she couldn't stop thinking about. "This isn't money, so I'll stay quiet, right?" The room fell silent. Benjamin stared at her, then slowly shook his head. "No, Hannah." His voice softened. "Absolutely not." Hannah looked at the envelope, then at Benjamin, then back at the envelope. For the first time, curiosity replaced suspicion. Slowly, she reached toward it, completely unaware that the contents inside would change her family's future in a way she never expected. Hannah stared at the envelope. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater. Outside, late afternoon sunlight reflected off patches of melting snow. Benjamin sat calmly at the kitchen table. Angela remained beside her daughter. Nobody rushed her. Nobody pressured her. Slowly, Hannah opened the envelope. Several papers slid onto the table. She looked confused, then more confused. Finally, she looked up. "I don't understand." Benjamin smiled. "That's normal." Angela picked up the first page. Her eyes moved across the document, then stopped. She read it again. And again. The room became very still. "What is it?" Hannah asked. Angela lowered the paper. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened. Finally, she managed to whisper, "We qualified." Benjamin nodded. The document officially restored Angela's housing assistance eligibility, not as a favor, not as charity. Not because anyone felt sorry for them, because they had qualified all along. The investigation had uncovered the errors, the false records, the manipulated files. Everything had been corrected. The approval came through proper review, proper documentation, proper process, the way it should have happened from the beginning. Hannah smiled slowly, then looked at the next paper. "What about this one?" Benjamin slid it closer. "Read the title." The little girl sounded out the words carefully. "Community Service Scholarship." She looked up. "For me?" Benjamin nodded. "Yes." Hannah blinked. "But I didn't do anything." Angela laughed softly, the first real laugh Benjamin had heard from her. "Oh, sweetheart." Benjamin leaned forward. "You helped people." "I just asked questions." "Exactly." The answer made Hannah even more confused. Benjamin smiled again. Many adults overlooked problems because asking questions felt uncomfortable. Hannah never stopped asking. That mattered more than she realized. The scholarship wasn't large. It wasn't life-changing money. That wasn't the purpose. It would help with school expenses, books, programs, future opportunities. Most importantly, it recognized something valuable: character, integrity, courage. Several weeks later, spring began arriving in Chicago. The snow slowly disappeared. Patches of green returned to the parks. Children played outside again. The city felt lighter somehow. At Westbrook, Haven changes continued. The Oversight Committee held regular meetings. Residents attended. Questions were encouraged. Financial reports became public. People who had once felt invisible finally had a voice. The process wasn't perfect, nothing ever was. But it was honest, and honesty changed everything. Emily Parker accepted a new position: Director of Financial Compliance. The title sounded impressive. The responsibility felt intimidating. On her first day, she stood inside the same office where she had once been afraid to speak. Sunlight poured through the windows. Fresh paint covered the walls. Several new employees worked nearby. Emily looked around, then smiled quietly. Not because she had won, because she had finally stopped being afraid. Maggie Turner took her role on the Community Oversight Committee seriously, very seriously. She read reports, attended meetings, asked difficult questions that occasionally made executives uncomfortable. She didn't mind. Someone had to ask. Someone always should have asked. The residents trusted her because she lived among them, served them food, knew their names, knew their stories. Trust built that way was stronger than any title. As for Richard Calloway, his future looked very different. The investigation concluded several months later. The findings were extensive: financial misconduct, fraudulent reporting, misuse of funds. The evidence proved overwhelming. The consequences followed legal channels. No dramatic courtroom speeches, no movie-style ending. Just accountability, real accountability. The kind built on facts, documents, witnesses, evidence. Exactly the way justice should work. One Saturday morning, Turner Family Diner hosted a community breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the building. Coffee brewed continuously. Families crowded the booths. Laughter bounced off the walls. Near the entrance, a small display case stood on a wooden shelf. People stopped to look at it, then smiled. Inside the case rested a single $1 bill, carefully framed, protected behind glass. Beneath it sat a small plaque. It read, "The dollar that made people look closer." Visitors often asked about it. Maggie always told the story. Not the story of a billionaire, not the story of an investigation. The story of a little girl who noticed something wasn't right and refused to stop believing what she saw. Hannah visited the diner almost every weekend. Some things never changed. She still liked hot chocolate. She still sat at the same booth. She still asked lots of questions. One morning, she noticed a younger boy sitting alone near the counter. His clothes looked worn, his expression nervous. Maggie quietly placed a muffin in front of him. The boy hesitated, then accepted it. Hannah watched for a moment. Without saying anything, she broke her own muffin in half, then carried one piece to the boy. "Here." The boy looked surprised. "You sure?" Hannah nodded. "Yeah," he smiled, a small smile, but genuine. Then they both ate quietly. Across the diner, Benjamin Sullivan happened to witness the exchange. He had stopped by for coffee, nothing more. Now he sat silently watching. The framed dollar rested only a few feet away. For several moments he simply observed. The little girl had received recognition, support, opportunity, yet none of it had changed her. She was still Hannah, still sharing what little she had, still noticing people others overlooked, still believing kindness mattered. Benjamin lowered his eyes toward his coffee cup. Steam rose gently into the morning air. A memory surfaced. His own mother, years ago, tired, overworked, trying her best, and a stranger helping her when she needed it most. That act of kindness had stayed with him his entire life. Now, another act of kindness had changed his life again. Only this time it came from an 8-year-old girl. The realization made him smile. Not because Hannah had saved the housing program, not because she had exposed corruption, not because she had helped uncover the truth. Those things mattered. But something else mattered more. She reminded people to look closer, to listen longer, to pay attention to those society often ignored, because sometimes the smallest voice in the room sees the clearest truth. And sometimes $1 can be worth far more than money. The morning sunlight streamed through the diner windows. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. People talked, laughed, shared meals, shared stories. Life moved forward. Not perfectly, but honestly, and for the first time in a long while that felt like enough. This story reminds us that kindness is not measured by how much we give, but by what it costs us to give it. Hannah only had $1, yet she was willing to share it with someone she believed needed help. That simple act revealed something powerful. True generosity begins with compassion, not wealth. It also teaches us never to underestimate people because of their age, income, or position in society. Many adults ignored warning signs because they trusted titles and paperwork. Hannah trusted what she saw with her own eyes. Her courage to keep asking questions helped uncover a truth that affected an entire community. Real justice rarely arrives overnight. It requires evidence, persistence, and people willing to do the right thing even when it is difficult. Emily spoke up. Maggie refused to stay silent. Benjamin chose responsibility over convenience. Together, their actions created meaningful change. Most importantly, this story reminds us to pay attention to those who are often overlooked. Sometimes the person with the least power is the one who sees the truth most clearly. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments about a small act of kindness you have witnessed or experienced. And if you believe honesty, courage, and compassion still matter in today's world, please subscribe and join us for more inspiring stories. This is a work of fiction created for storytelling and entertainment purposes.